Now, the trumpet in Revelation 9, that took place between 636 and 936, 300 years. These are the scorpions, these are the Saracens, these are the children of the desert. This is the fifth or the first woe trumpet, or the fifth trumpet in line. Then you find the second woe trumpet, or the sixth. These are the Turks. And this, in the second half of Revelation 9, takes us from 1062 through to 1453, when Constantinople was taken, the great jewel of Christianity in the East. These two are woe. Why? Because unlike the German barbarians who accepted Christianity and the empire in Rome did come back again, when the Saracens went charging out of Arabia and swept right across the north of Africa, right up into Spain, and then did a right-hand turn and went right up there to Constantinople, when these Saracens went swarming across like locusts, they were never ever going to be converted to Christianity. Never. It was the other way around. You believe in Islam or die. That's why this is going to be woe. These barbarians accepted Christianity. These Saracens are not going to accept Christianity, nor would the Turks. They would destroy everything in their path, and unless you were converted to Islam, you were dead. The sword or Islam. So God says, if you think that was bad, wait until I pour out my judgments with the fifth trumpet and the sixth trumpet. It is woe. Now there's where the West came back. So in 800 AD, the Western Catholic Holy Roman Empire started to emerge in 800 AD. So the barbarians accepted Christianity and the West came back. It was only eclipsed. That is why the West, compared to the East, this is woe. Now chapter 9, both first parts and second parts. First half of chapter 9 is all about, up to verse 12, so verses 1 to 12, we are concerned predominantly with the spread of Islam. Islam, submission. If you met somebody who was a member of Islam, they are a member of a group who are submissive. So that's what the word Islam means, submission. If you're a Muslim, the word Muslim means a believer. So you are a believer in Islam. You are a believer in submission. Now there is the result of the fifth angel blasting his trumpet. There's the result of verses 1 to 12 of Revelation 9. That Islamic empire that stretched from the coast of Spain right up to the border of India, that was the result of after 200 years. So from the time of the death of Muhammad, 200 years later, that was the result. And that Islamic empire eclipsed even the Roman Empire. The capital of the Islamic empire was Medina. Its capital then moved up to Damascus. And then its capital finally rested at Baghdad. And if you went to Baghdad, it rivaled Athens and Rome in its glory. If you were a person living in the time of the Islamic Empire and you wanted to journey from one end of the empire to the other, it would take you nearly 1 year to traverse the entire length of the Islamic Empire. That was the result of what Muhammad started. But no, really, that was the result of the fifth angel, God's judgment upon the Eastern Roman Empire. Let's have a look now at verse 1 and 2 of Revelation chapter 9. In these first two verses, it will enable us to unlock the true meaning of the rest of the verses in Revelation 9. So in verse 1 and verse 2, these words, and the fifth angel sounded, this is the first woe trumpet, the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth. And to him was given a key to a bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. Now let's get something really clear in our minds to start with. This star is a man. We know that because verse 1 says, a key was given to him and he opened the bottomless pit. This star, or this meteor that fell from heaven to the earth, was a man. I'm going to endeavour to prove that as we go through. So verse 1 is Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, the founder of the Islamic faith. Now we'll show you as that works as we go through. Now to Muhammad, who was this star that fell from Mecca to Medina, and he went crashing to the earth, and all the things that he was to teach, all the things that he was going to do to the Arabians would be a terrible judgment upon the on the eastern third of the earth of the Roman Empire. Now let's first of all make sure we've got this clearly in our minds with respect to what was Muhammad given and what did he do with what he was given. Well, the record also says he was given a key to the bottomless pit. Now this is the thing we need to get our head around from the very beginning. We've got this expression in the English, in the AV version of the Bible. It's called the bottomless pit there at the end of verse 1, and it's called the bottomless pit in verse 2. Now here we have this expression in the English, bottomless pit, is used 7 times in the book of Revelation. So it's used in chapter 9 verse 1, it's used, I'm talking about the English expression here, the word bottomless pit. It's used in verse 2 of Revelation 9. The expression in the English is also used in verse 11 of chapter 9. It's used in chapter 11 verse 7, chapter 17 verse 8, chapter 20 verses 1 and 3. So only 7 times in the whole of the Apocalypse do you have this expression, the bottomless pit. But only on 2 occasions is it used differently in the Greek, and they are here in chapter 9 and verses 1 and 2. And there's a very, very important reason. When you go and look at the other 5 occasions, in the Greek, the other 5 occasions outside of verse 1 and 2 of Revelation 9, the Greek is always and simply the abyss. And the beast arose out of the abyss. Those 5 occasions outside of these 2, it's only the abyss. So you could scrub out the expression bottomless pit and simply refer to the abyss. But Muhammad was not given the key to the abyss. He wanted the abyss. And all of the caliphs that came after him, the captains of the faithful, the caliphs that followed Muhammad, they too, these leaders of the Saracens, they wanted the abyss, whatever the abyss was. Muhammad was not given the key to the abyss. He was given, as it is in the Greek, he was given the key to the pit of the abyss, and there's a difference. So in the RV, in these 2 verses, verse 1 and verse 2, it is correctly translated as is in the Greek. Muhammad was given the key to the shaft of the abyss, not the abyss itself. That is what he wanted. That is what he got the key to. Now we've got a little expression here to say this, and we'll endeavour to prove this with a couple of quotations. This key that Muhammad was given was to open a shaft that led to what he wanted, which was the abyss. Now what are we talking about? How can we explain this from the New Testament? Let's have a look at this quotation, which is a really good quotation, and it's found for us in John chapter 4. Now, in John chapter 4, to show us what we mean by Muhammad was given the key to the pit or the shaft or the tunnel that led to an abyss. When we go to John chapter 4 and verses 11 and 12, you see the word well that is used, and the word well is used twice. Now, you know the story. Jesus came to the woman of Samaria. Jesus asked the woman of Samaria for drink. The woman said to Jesus, "Sir, you're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman, and you are asking me for drink?" Well, of course, Jesus responded to the woman of Samaria and said, "If you had known the gift and the person to whom you were speaking to, then you would have asked of me, and I would have given you living water to drink." The woman is there listening to what Jesus is saying and saying, "Sir, you're saying to me that you have got water to give me?" She said, "The well," and it's twice used in John 4, which is the Greek word pit, and it's the same Greek word used here in Revelation 9. The woman turned to Jesus and said, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with. How is it that you are offering me this water? You have nothing to draw with, and the well, or the shaft, or the tunnel, or the pit that leads to the water that you are saying you can give me is deep." That shaft, that tunnel that led to the water was 150 feet deep and 8 feet wide. So there is an example in the New Testament where the woman says, if you want water, the only way to get the water is to go down through the shaft. And it's a long way. Now that's exactly the idea here in Revelation 9 and verse 1. Muhammad was given a key to a shaft or a tunnel that would lead to the abyss. Now what are we talking about? Here is the abyss, Europe. And Muhammad wanted the whole of Europe converted to Islam. He wanted to get in there to the Catholics, and he wanted to, well, you'll see in a moment, cleave their skulls. He wanted to get into Europe and take all of Europe. He wanted the abyss. But if you look at Revelation 17 and verse 15 and compare that with Revelation 17 and verse 8, you read that the abyss, which is the bottomless pit, The abyss are peoples and nations and tongues, this great mass of people in Europe out of which the beast would ascend. And Muhammad wanted the abyss. What did he get? God says, you are getting the tunnel. There is the pit. And Muhammad was given a key to open up that area and use that as a tunnel and stream out of Arabia and Palestine and Israel up into this area. He tried to get into the abyss. If Muhammad and the caliphs that followed him, the Saracens, the children of the desert, if he could control Arabia, which he did, he welded all of these factious tribes together, these pagan Arabians, welded them all together, great stream of locusts. His successors conquered Syria and Palestine. He then had the open way, he had the tunnel to take Europe. And these Saracens streamed out of this tunnel right across northern Africa, right up into Spain. And they went the other way, and they went right up there into Constantinople. Muhammad, the star that fell to the earth. Just something about him and a bit of history, and then we'll pick up how the record talks about it in Revelation 9. Now, in AD 609, a very, very important year for the Islamic faith, because that was when Muhammad had his great vision, this imposter he was. AD 609, Muhammad was 39. So this is fellow, he's lived in Mecca all his life, 39 years old. He goes up to a mountain, he has a vision. He comes down, he writes a bit of stuff on some paper. Goes back up the mountain again, has another vision. Up and down the mountain, having all of these visions, you see. Now Muhammad, born in Mecca, his father died before he was born. His mother died before he was 6. His grandfather picked him up, looked after him for a little while, and then his grandfather died. Well, then his uncle picked him up, and his uncle started to look after him in Mecca. And his uncle was a powerful man in a powerful clan. And his uncle became his protector. So when he gets to 39 years of age and he has these visions, something was astir in Mecca. Now Mecca, there was a crossroad to a lucrative caravan trade. How's this going to impact on Muhammad and this star? See all these roads? I mean, you've got all of these sailing vessels that came from East Africa and India and with all their spices, and they moved up into Egypt, and all these roads went out of Mecca. It was a very, very lucrative trade route. Not only so, but in Mecca, the times of Muhammad, they were all pagans. And Mecca was the site of Arabia's holiest pagan shrine. So these Arabians were all pagans, and they worshipped 300 gods. So they worshipped water, a bit of wood, tree. And so what they had in this Kaaba, they also had this black rock. It was a meteor. And this black rock was wedged into the side of the mountain. They used to kiss it. Now the interesting thing about the Arabians is they loved to fight. There are two things they honoured: manliness. Look after your woman. Look after your well. Look after your pasture. And they loved orators. If you were good at poetry, they just idolised you. So if you were a poet or a man poet, they loved you. But they used to fight. Fighting over water, fighting over very scarce pastoral lands. But when they got to the Kaaba, they weren't allowed to fight. What they did, they roped off this area around here. It was holy ground, you see. And they thought, heck, can't fight. We'll have to sell. So they set up all these stalls, all these bazaars. And so they sold. They put down their arms and they started to sell. Well, Muhammad comes down from the mountain. He says, there are no more 300 gods. They don't exist. There's only one God. Now, you imagine what impact that had. They turned around and looked at him and said, I beg your pardon? They said, there is only one God. They went, well, what about the Kaaba? It'll have to go. What about our 300 gods? Don't exist. What about our selling? Bad luck. And so they went to Muhammad's uncle and they said, get rid of him. He's got to go. And there were very wealthy tribes. And they said, this is bad for business. But his uncle didn't. He protected him. And so his uncle was protecting this man that was starting to preach this stuff that was not running well for the Arabians. Well, his uncle died. And when his uncle died, these other tribesmen were going to get Muhammad. And so Muhammad, with a few little followers, then fled to Medina in AD 622. This is an important part of the Islamic calendar because this is the beginning of their calendar, and this is what they call the flight. So they begin their Arabian calendar from when Muhammad fled Mecca and he fled to Medina, the city of the Prophet. He was in Medina, this supposed man who had a vision. And what's he doing in Medina? He says, you need food? Yeah. Well, there's a caravan out there, camels, with all that. Go and kill them. Go and get your food. So they were raiding caravans, getting all the loot, all the money, and he's a religious man. And he's killing and plundering and pillaging caravans. Well, you imagine you're an Arab and you think he always wins and he gets plenty of money. This man is a good man to be with. And so all of the Arabians started to flock to Muhammad. That is how the Arabian Islamic faith began to grow rapidly. He died. When he died, his lifelong friend, Abu Bakr, then became the first caliph, the first captain of the faithful. This began the split between the Sunni and the Shiite. Muhammad's dead. Who do we appoint? And the Shiite said it's got to be a descendant from Muhammad. And the Sunni, who were in the majority, said no, it's got to be the best person for the job. And so Abu Bakr, the lifelong friend of Muhammad, he was elected a Sunni, the best person for the job. And from that moment on, there has been this division, this split between the Sunni and the Shiite. They then moved in, the caliphs and the Saracens, they moved in after Muhammad died. They moved in and they invaded Israel, Syria and Jerusalem in 636 to 637. And then the locusts went and swarmed out of the pit. Now look at this. This is an extract from Freeman's Historical Geography of Europe on page 111 and page 112. Have a look at what this historian says about the movement of the Saracens, the children of the desert under their captains of the faith. This historian says, in a few campaigns, the empire, that is, the Roman Empire, lost all its possessions beyond Mount Taurus. So if you're in Rome and looking back toward the east, you would see Mount Taurus. All of the possessions of the Roman Empire, the 1/3, the Hellenized east, the historian says, in a few campaigns, these Saracens, because he's talking about the Saracens here, he says in a few campaigns the Roman Empire lost all of its possessions beyond Mount Taurus. That is, it lost one of the 3 great divisions of the empire. That is exactly what Revelation 9 is about. The 5th angel blasted his trumpet, the first woe trumpet, and the Hellenized east was overwhelmed by a swarm of Saracens. He says the area that was lost to the Saracens was namely that bit where neither Greek nor Roman civilizations had ever thoroughly taken root, the Hellenized East. Every province that was conquered by the Saracens was utterly locked away. It became the possession of men, altogether alien and hostile in race, language, manners and religion. And Muhammad was given the key, and the tunnel, the pit, or the shaft from which they streamed from, sent the Saracens right up there, and they wanted the abyss. They got as far as Tours in AD 732. And when they got to Tours, somebody stopped them. And the person that stopped them was Charlemagne's grandfather. Charlemagne, soon to burst on the scene in 800 AD and join together with the Pope and form the Holy Roman Empire, which would last 1,000 years. We're not far away from 800 AD, the coming back of the western part of the empire. So the Saracens want to take Europe. God says, no, I've got other plans for Europe. And so the Saracens were blocked by Charlemagne's grandfather, and they tried to swarm up there and take the abyss. So they did a right-hand turn, and they went up to try and take Constantinople, but they were stopped. And God said, Constantinople is not for the Saracens. Constantinople is for the Turks. The Saracens had got Constantinople, and if they'd streamed past Constantinople, and if they'd taken Vienna, which the Turks got to Vienna but were blocked, couldn't go any further. If the Saracens had taken Vienna, then Charlemagne's grandfather would have had the Saracens at his back, and Europe would have been totally different to what we know today. Europe would have been Muslim, Islamic. But God said, you are only getting the key to the shaft. What an amazing thing. Revelation 9 verse 11, an amazing verse. How accurate is the Bible with respect to these Saracens streaming out and only taking the Hellenized third, only getting the shaft or the tunnel that led to Europe. They could not get Europe because God said that's not yours to take. Now verse 11 of Revelation 9, and these locusts or these Saracens, they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit. This king is not the star in verse 1. The star in verse 1 is Muhammad. This king in verse 11 is not one man. They are kings. They are caliphs. Now we read the words again. The locust had caliphs, kings over them, who were messengers. So that's an angel. In the Greek it's messenger. So these caliphs, these kings of the Saracens, were messengers, not of the abyss, but to the abyss. Now this is what the verse is saying. I'm a caliph. I am the captain of my Saracen hordes. I have a message to the abyss, to Europe. And my message is this. I'm coming to get you. and when I do, I will destroy you if you do not convert to Islam. How do we know? You have a look at this. You imagine you being in Europe. You're in Europe, you're a Catholic, and you hear this message, a message from the caliphs, and they've got a message to you who live in the abyss in Europe, and their message is, we're coming to get you, and you say, yeah? Well, what are your credentials that you can destroy me? Well, God says, I'll show them to you. He says, we are destroyers. We've already done it. Have a look at the way God writes this. He said, we've got a message, we're going to destroy you. And the record says there in Revelation 9 verse 11, the name of these caliphs or these kings is in the Hebrew, destroyer, in the Greek, destroyer. So have a look at our CV. Look at our resume. We have gone through as a mob of locusts and we have destroyed the Hebrew. And we've swept across the top of the Hellenized Greek part of the Roman Empire. We've destroyed the Greek and we're coming to get the Latin. That's why you don't have it written in the Latin. God left the Latin out because they'd never do it. Be converted to Islam or be destroyed as we have surely destroyed the Hebrew portion of the empire and the Greek portion of the empire. What an amazing thing. Now, the locusts. How mean these locusts looked. Now we see in verse 3, this is with reference to the Saracens, and it says there arose or came out of the pit or the shaft smoke, and then locusts came out of the smoke upon the earth. Why does God call the Saracens locusts? Was it a fitting symbol? Absolutely. Because if you ask anybody in Syria where locusts come from, they say Arabia. They all come across from Arabia. So God says geographically, I'm choosing a very apt symbol to show you that Saracens, I'll call them locusts, these children of the desert. Another very interesting proof with respect to locusts is that in fact the locust is used in parts of Arabia as their heraldic symbol. When you look at the word in the Hebrew, the word locust in Hebrew is arba. The word Arab in Hebrew is arbai. The word desert in Hebrew is araba. They are so close. You could actually look at the desert and go, there's a locust. Or worse, you could look at an Arab and say, there's a locust. Or look at a locust and say, there's a desert. They are all mixed up. So close. And God says, get it? Desert, Arab, locust, all very closely related. And so God says, I'm going to choose locust as a fitting symbol of the Arabians who come from the desert. When you have a look at Revelation 9 and verse 7, you read that these Saracens, in verse 7, the shapes of the locusts were like horses prepared unto battle. What does a locust head look like? A horse. So a locust head looks like a horse. So the Italians call locusts cavallate, which is little horse, from which you get the word cavalry. So God says, the symbology, locusts look like horses. In fact, and then you read on in verse 7, and these locusts were prepared for battle, and they had on their heads crowns like gold. Well, of course, many of you would be aware, when the Saracens swarmed into battle on their horses, they had these long, flowing yellow turbans. And John looked at them and thought, they weren't crowns of gold, they had crowns like gold. And when the Saracens streamed into battle, they wore yellow turbans. And then John says they had faces like men. Well, they had beards, because the Romans were clean-shaven. So were the Egyptians. So if you've got a beard, you're a man. So John looks at it and he says, they got men's faces. But the problem was, the anomaly was they had hair like women. So these long flowing locks flowing out from their yellow turbans, big bushy beards, and they had teeth like lions. They were ferocious fighters. And he says they had little breastplates. Little breastplates. You pick up a locust and have a look at his chest. You know what he's got? A breastplate. He's got a little cuticle. This is amazing the way in which God uses this. And Mohammedan tradition tells the story that Muhammad was out there one day, he put out his hand, a locust fell into his hand. And when he looked at the locust, inscribed on the wings of the locust were the words, "We are the army of the great God." That is in Bedouin tradition. These Arabians saw themselves as the army of the great God.